Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. It looks like Entertainment Weekly's dance card is pretty full these days, as they just wrapped up their spotlight on The Amazing Spider-Man 2, only to jump into their next spotlight for X-Men Days of Future Past. You almost have a really polite line of these big summer blockbusters waiting to make their case to you one by one. And just like we got a little bit of news about Sinister Six with that Amazing Spider-Man 2 spotlight, some news came to light with this X-Men Days of Future Past spotlight that caught a number of people's attention. In fact, Dylan on Twitter said, "Grace, you have to cover this story that Fox is considering a Mystique spin-off." And in fact, they're considering a number of spin-offs. Lauren Schuler-Donner, the producer of these X-Men films, came out and said, originally Fox wasn't behind spin-offs. The old regime just didn't see the benefit of it. They only really did the Wolverine spin-off. They had considered a Magneto spin-off, but even though there was talk in the past, they never materialized. But she said this new regime at Fox totally gets it. Of course they do, when they see how Marvel is doing such a great job with their spin-offs. Look at the one that just opened April 4th to the tune of $95 million. So apparently Fox finally gets it, and they're considering some spin-offs. Now, in preparation for their coverage, Entertainment Weekly had a poll, and they asked their readers who they were the most interested in seeing in their own film. And of course, Deadpool still is at the top of the list. I think that film is extremely far from ever happening, especially after what Fox did. They made such a mess out of things with their depiction of Deadpool and X-Men Origins Wolverine with Ryan Reynolds. Who sews Deadpool's mouth shut? His whole thing is that he talks. And also Ryan Reynolds not only went over to another comic book property with Green Lantern for DC, so I think that kind of makes him persona non grata over at Fox and certainly with the Marvel property, but he just isn't a box office draw anymore these days. So I'm not sure if his contract still has him tied in there, but I think he would have to have a huge hit for them to consider building an entire movie around him. And who else could play the role but Ryan Reynolds? I've said before that when Ryan Reynolds got a six-pack, he ruined his career. And, some people responded to that comment and said, well, what's wrong with trying to be sexy? And there's nothing wrong with trying to be sexy. My point is that Ryan Reynolds became more concerned with being a sex symbol than he did with being a funny guy. You'll notice that he doesn't quite make the same jokes that he used to, and even in his last film, R.I.P.D., he ended up being the straight guy to Jeff Bridges being the funny guy. And, back in the day, when Ryan Reynolds was at the height of his popularity, he was the jokester, he was the funny guy, and I think that was a much better use of his talents instead of spending so much time at the gym. Then after Deadpool, interestingly, Gambit was next, and I think that's very exciting. As many of you know, I'm really in favor of the Channing Tatum as Gambit idea, which Lauren Schuler-Donner is working on as we speak. Channing Tatum wants to play Gambit, so that's coming possibly to fruition. Fox is interested in it. It's not just a fan wish, but as you can see, it is a fan wish. So I'm sure that they're looking at this poll going, that Gambit idea is pretty good after all. If 22 Jump Street does really spectacularly well this summer, don't be surprised. Well, also Jupiter Ascending. They might cancel each other out. Channing Tatum to some degree might be like, I shouldn't have made Jupiter Ascending. It's a little bit like Scarlett Johansson with Lucy. They're like, it's like picking in a scab, box office scab. If they just left well enough alone, they might have had a much better opportunity. But we'll see. So if you want to see Channing Tatum as Gambit, go see Jupiter Ascending. I don't know if I can sit through that movie. It doesn't look very good, but obviously I will to review it. Then next, interestingly, X-Force was the next thing that came up. Of course, the writer-director of Kick-Ass 2 is supposed to be attached to that. Kick-Ass 2 was such a huge underperformer. That was one of those deals that was signed on the eve of the release of a film, hoping to capitalize on it, get in there early, get that talent cheap before they quote-unquote blow up with their film, but he never blew up. So they might have a problem there. Then interestingly, I loved this. Storm was next on the list. Obviously, I'm sure with an asterisk saying recast the role. But there's so many great actresses working. Some people have even mentioned Lupita Nyong'o would be a great choice for this. I think that a Storm movie would be spectacular and maybe necessary to revamp the character at this point because so much damage has been done. But Storm, not big on the personality front, but maybe this would be the opportunity to give her one. Next, then came Mystique, even though that was the big headline for the article, where they were like, we want to make a Jennifer Lawrence Mystique movie. That was kind of the thing they were really trying to push. I have mixed feelings about that, which we'll get to in a moment, but Mystique was pretty far down the list, as you can see, and the next was Magneto, which I thought was interesting because people love Michael Fassbender and they love Ian McKellen in the role, but I guess they feel that character gets enough attention in the main X-Men movies that it's not necessary to give him his own series. Also, it would deal, obviously, it was originally supposed to deal with this, and I think it would, although First Class covered this to some degree, and that's Magneto's history with the Holocaust, which I think is very compelling. It was only touched upon briefly in First Class. I feel there's a lot more interesting places to go with that. But maybe, Fox is like, do we really want to make a mutant Holocaust movie? I don't know. It would certainly be very difficult to pull off with the right tone, having action-adventure scenes. Now that I think about it, if I was, a development executive at Fox, I might be like, you know what? I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. It seems really tricky, especially at Fox, when they do not have a good history with getting things right. So anyway, back to Mystique. Now, we just talked the other day about Jennifer Lawrence being a big movie star. And I would say, and as I said in my response to that viewer question, I think it's mixed. I think Jennifer Lawrence is talented. I think she's well-liked. But I think she's also benefited from being in some really great properties. I don't know if Hunger Games would not have succeeded without her. I compared it to Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr. and Pirates of the Caribbean with Johnny Depp. Two franchises which I think largely depend on that talent. Although I think Hunger Games is, a very wide cast. I think Katniss is somewhat of a passive heroine. So I think the movie, I could see it doing well without her. I'm sorry, any J-Law fans, if I've offended you, but that's just how I feel. Also, you'll see, sometimes she doesn't always guarantee a huge box office hit when she's outside of these properties. American Hustle did well, but again, that was an ensemble cast. It wasn't the Jennifer Lawrence show. I don't know if people would be interested in the Jennifer Lawrence show, because I think a little of Jennifer Lawrence goes a long way. Also, as I said yesterday for this viewer question, with her role as Mystique, I feel she's not as good as Rebecca Romijn. There's just something off about her performance. I hope maybe she'll, change my mind for X-Men Days of Future Past, but I feel she's kind of just obligated to play this role at this point. I don't like the fact that they show so much of Jennifer Lawrence instead of, human Jennifer Lawrence rather than, in Mystique mode as they did with Rebecca Romijn. It's obviously a ploy to capitalize on Jennifer Lawrence's celebrity and popularity with a certain demographic, but I think it's disrespectful to the character, who made quite a point of saying, I only like to walk around in my true mutant form because why should I be ashamed of who I am? I guess she's still ashamed at this point in the franchise because they're going back in time. But anyway, the other thing I have an issue with, and I actually talked to some people about this yesterday because I was taking my own informal poll. I was like, hey, do you want to see a Mystique movie? And the answer was no. And I said, well, what about one starring Rebecca Romijn, thinking that would sell the deal? And they were like, no, still don't want to see it. And I was like, why is that? And I would say that most of the people responded that it was perhaps a little bit too much nudity for an entire film. Of course, the character of Mystique now basically walks around naked. Rebecca Romijn, there's a story that she used to say, hey, and she would go to her cast members, her fellow cast members, and say, I'm not naked, right? It's like wearing a bikini. And they'd be like, nope, you're pretty naked. It's obvious, it's a selling point, it helps the character, but I think right now, she just kind of runs in and out, she does some action sequences, and it's not for a long period of time. An entire movie following around someone who's basically a nudist might be a tough sell to the mainstream. Although, you can counter that by saying Mystique would have to impersonate a lot of other people, obviously, because she's a shapeshifter. So what actors would you be bringing into the mix that way? They would conceivably be playing the character for long periods of time in the film, unless, again, if the whole purpose of this is to capitalize on Jennifer Lawrence's celebrity, she's playing a shapeshifter. You can't capitalize on that, because the whole point is that she doesn't look like herself, to a huge degree, not just like some makeup, but it's a different person. Also, I would like to say that I think Jennifer Lawrence really, another example of her not being tremendously committed to this character is that she let somebody else do the Carl Jr.'s ad. Obviously someone could say, well, maybe she just didn't want to be associated with that horrible, horrible ad. It was for some, manly burger they are putting out, and the joke is that Mystique eats this burger by turning into a man, because only you have to be a man to truly enjoy this burger. It was really kind of a really offensive ad. Didn't make any sense. I don't know why they would be like, you know what, I don't want any women to buy this burger. I guess it's a really big burger with cheese and bacon on it, so you wouldn't have a lot of women buying it anyway, but still, I don't know, I thought it was a tired, cliche, sexist joke. And, I think the Carl's Jr. writing staff should have maybe put about another 10, 15 minutes into coming up with that commercial. But still, they had another actress come in there and don the blue paint and the scales. And I'm sure they thought, well, who's going to know that it's not Jennifer Lawrence? And everybody did. As soon as you see it, you're like, that's another actress, that's a stand-in. So I just feel that if Jennifer Lawrence was truly committed to the role, she'd want to make sure that she was always, playing it and making sure it was done right. Larry the Cable Guy, for instance, not the greatest example, I guess, but he has a lot of integrity because whenever they do anything for Mater from Cars, he insists on doing the voice to make sure, because he says that character means a lot to me, it means a lot to my fans, it means a lot to people who aren't aware that they're a fan of mine because they like that character. I want to make sure that it's always portrayed correctly. So, I don't know. I think the Gambit movie would be great. I think a Storm movie might be interesting, but I think that the X-Men movies should really focus more on getting their core storyline right before they start focusing on spin-offs, particularly after the disaster that was X-Men Origins Wolverine. Some people feel the Wolverine got more back on track, and I think to some degree it did. I still don't think it's at the level it needs to be, and so that would be my suggestion to Fox. Also, get that timeline right. Nail that sucker down because you guys are all over the place. Havoc is Cyclops, I guess, his uncle or his father. Who knows what's going on, but he can't be his dad. Also, if they're not brothers, you take away the entire storyline about their father who becomes Corsair and that, that fateful airplane flight and how Scott loses control of his powers. It's really integral to the characters. But if you separate them by generation, or at least one generation, it doesn't work. So that's the first story of the day. I'm curious how you guys feel. Do you want to see X-Men spin-offs? Do you think the franchise is ready? Who do you want to see spun off? Another Wolverine film is already in the works, and we have the Apocalypse film coming up. But maybe a Jean Grey film. I would love to see a Jean Grey film. She's been totally absent from these movies, except the Wolverine. But they go back in time, and interestingly, Jean Grey never shows up. So, and then we could get our Dark Phoenix saga. That would actually be pretty cool. I would support that 100%. Also, what they're doing in the comics right now with Jean Grey is pretty interesting as well. So that could be explored with this Jean out of time. All right, second story of the day. Game of Thrones, the team behind that series, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, they're two screenwriters who hit the big time with Game of Thrones. It was in development for like 6 years. They really hadn't done a lot of great work before that. Now they're famous, they're considered top of their game, and they're very busy, obviously, making Game of Thrones. It was just renewed for 2 more seasons, 4 just started, but it had such a high ratings. It's the highest ratings ever for Game of Thrones, and the second highest ever for HBO overall after The Sopranos finale. So immediately, HBO greenlight seasons 5 and 6. So they're very far away from being able to work on anything else, but it was announced they're at least making plans to work on their first feature when they either get a break or Game of Thrones eventually wraps. Of course, Game of Thrones is their calling card. They're going to want to make sure that goes very well. They often co-write most of the episodes, and they often direct as well. I believe this first episode was actually directed by them. So anyway, what could possibly be worthy of their time on the big screen when so many feel that their Game of Thrones film series is film worthy? They're adapting a novel called Dirty White Boys, and it's about 3 violent escaped convicts and the lawman hunting them down. And so I was looking into this, and they said the first line of the book is what hooked them. And I can't repeat it here because it's super inappropriate. From just quickly taking a look at this property that they've optioned, or they've actually agreed with Fox to direct it. Fox had already optioned the book, so they we love this book, let's go find out what studio has it. Ran over to Fox. I'm sure Warner Brothers, who owns HBO, is like, what the hell? We continue to give you millions of dollars to make Game of Thrones, and you're going to make your first feature film for another studio. But I guess shame on Warner Brothers for not locking that stuff down with a contract of their own. So anyway, it's extremely violent and lewd. But you know what? So is Game of Thrones. And Game of Thrones has worked quite well, and it's made everybody embrace it. Everyone's like, you know what? This nudity's fine. This weird, sex stuff, these sex games going on. A brothel is like the Cheers of Game of Thrones. Everybody goes and meets there. Everybody knows your name. And it works. The mainstream has accepted this. So I guess if Benioff and Weiss want to, prove that, use their skill set that they've proven they have, this is a great way to do it by saying, hey, we can make these characters likable as well. Even Benioff and Weiss agree that this is going to be a hurdle for them to make these escaped convicts, anti-heroes, believable anti-heroes, considering just how, I believe the first scene in a book is the main character trying to fend off a really violent rape. That was already handled with Shawshank Redemption quite well, quite respectfully, very dramatically, So it would be interesting to see, a scene that starts off a film like that could be a real deal breaker for a lot of people. And also, of course, with a film, they can go much further than they go on HBO with Game of Thrones. But the other thing I wanted to say is that perhaps they need to do something that's violent and lewd to, give their audience what they want, what's expected of them when people see their names. Although I feel a lot of people, except for the core, the diehard fans, aren't aware about David Benioff and D.B. Weiss still. Are you? Are you a Game of Thrones fan? Are you aware of these two guys? Benioff is married to Amanda Peet, by the way. They're kind of like a Hollywood C couple, maybe, B- with his success here. So, maybe she's like, you got to give me a role in this movie. If you didn't give me anything on Game of Thrones, you got to help me out here. All right, so that's the second story of the day. The third story, this broke lately. No, this is still in the rumor stage, but it made me really angry, so I wanted to discuss it today. I was looking for a third story, and then I remembered how angry this made me last night, and I was like, perfect, I'm going to talk about it on Morning Movie News. Disney, there's a rumor going around who's going to direct one of their upcoming live-action fairy tales, which is Beauty and the Beast. This makes me really angry. First, let me just tell you the rumor. It's Bill Condon, people are saying. He directed Dreamgirls, but then, of course, the final two Twilight films, Breaking Dawn, Part 1 and 2. And I guess that Bella loved a beast, but, a very different kind of beast. And that worked out so well, quite successfully. But, that was building off of, the Twilight phenomenon. So, it'd be pretty hard to mess that up. But Bill Condon, not a great choice, but that's who they're eyeing. And, of course, there are competing projects for this live-action Beauty and the Beast. You have the one that Guillermo del Toro apparently is still working on with Emma Watson supposed to play the lead. And, considering, people say, the industry was trying to float the idea that she brought people in to see Noah. I don't know if that's the case, because then why wasn't she bringing anybody in to see any of her other films? Although Russell Crowe has a hard time bringing people in. I don't think it was any particular actor. I think it was the film itself and Aronofsky and what he did with it. I think the controversy he created and the new ideas he introduced. So, people walked away from that film with wildly different reactions, which I guess good art does. And that film, as I said, is more of a piece of art than a piece of entertainment. But as I said in my review, I did like it. Back to Beauty and the Beast. But then also, we've been talking a lot about this French version from Christophe Gans coming out. And maybe Disney saw that trailer and was like, that looks pretty good. How dare somebody else do a live-action fairy tale that looks really good? We're going to let Universal do all the crappy ones they want, and Warner Brothers can try, but it looks like Christophe Gans actually is doing a good job. We should do one. So I have a problem with this for two reasons. First, we've been talking a lot, 'cause I'm going to do this. I don't think this is actually the biggest reason why they shouldn't make the film, but I think it's the most timely. Just this week, we had a big discussion about Godzilla and how it should be respectful to Japanese culture. I'm going to review Rio 2 later today, which I feel is very respectful to South American culture. And then I think that, here with Beauty and the Beast, this is originally a French fairy tale. And I think that Christophe Gans and his whole team have done quite a great job of kind of bringing the story home after Disney did their animated film. And I don't see why Disney just can't let them have it. Disney certainly doesn't need it. They have Maleficent. They have Cinderella coming up. They have a Jungle Book. And there are so many fairy tales. There are fairy tales they've never even done. But yet now they have to go and revisit Beauty and the Beast. I think that, let France have this just at least for a little while, particularly because they've done such an amazing job with it. The second reason that I have a big problem that actually makes me angry is that I think that the animated film is one of Disney's best, Beauty and the Beast. It is such a work of art. It is the highlight of Howard Ashman's career. Linda Wolverton wrote that script, who's writing Maleficent. She wrote Alice in Wonderland, the live-action version. It's just a stunning film. It is the first animated feature ever to be nominated for Best Picture. It's just stunningly done. And I think that there's no reason to touch that, again, especially from the same studio. I brought up my concerns about the French version having to compete with the legacy of that animated version. It's so good. It's been so long since it came out, but it's still so pivotal to people's minds. Disney World just had a Fantasyland expansion, and a large portion of that expansion focuses around Beauty and the Beast. You can go to see Belle's house, which I did. It's for very little kids, but the special effects are quite good. And then also the Be Our Guest restaurant, which is also wonderful. And the Beast comes out, he welcomes everyone to dinner. You can see the rose with falling petals. Literally, it's a very cool effect. You have to go into the Beast castle, and it's really very well realized and very pretty. And it just shows, of all the movies they could have picked, there's a Little Mermaid section. They're opening the Snow White roller coaster, which looks pretty awesome. I've gotten way off track here. I'm kind of turned into an ad for Disney World. It's such a great place. But anyway, back to this movie. I just feel that it's really inappropriate for them to, almost kind of wipe away their own product. I think that Beauty and the Beast, the animated film, is one of the best animated films ever made, certainly one of the best animated films ever from Disney. It would be almost if they were like, you know what, guys? We're going to do a live-action Frozen right away. I would actually be more okay with that because I think that Frozen had a lot of problems and maybe a live-action version could fix it. But, it's like people love the animated version. Why are you going to have a competing live-action version? And also, apparently with no angle. One of the great things about Maleficent and why it seems to have a reason for existing is that it's a different perspective. It's from the villain's point of view. But with what I'm hearing from Cinderella and the Jungle Book, those are just straight live-action adaptations, which, again, I have a problem with. These, Alice in Wonderland was successful because it was a continuation of the story. It wasn't just a retelling of Alice in Wonderland. So I think that I would really point out to Disney that if they're going to do these live-action fairy tales, the whole point of them is to reimagine them, make them a little darker, put twists on them, and maybe tell a different perspective of the story or the story later on, a continuation. So anyway, I'm wondering how you guys feel. Are you as upset as I am about a Beauty and the Beast live-action version from Disney itself? Do you think that we should let France have this for a little bit? Or America all the way? Write your thoughts down below. All right, so let's move on to the viewer question. I mentioned yesterday that this was coming. This is for Roz Garby. Roz has been so polite for quite some time trying to get me to answer this question. Been very nice, consistent, yet, as I said, polite about it. So just earlier this week, Roz says, "Hi, Grace. Sorry to bug you, but it's my 18th birthday on Sunday, and it would make my day if you could cover the news that the video game The Last of Us will be made into a feature film." So then he repeated his question, and it goes, "Request. Hi, Grace. Can you, oh, by the way, don't write request, write question, because sometimes when I'm going through looking for questions, I just do a find for question, the word question. So if you don't write question anywhere in your question, I'm not going to see it." So Roz said, "Hi, Grace. Can you please cover the recent news that the video game The Last of Us will be adapted into a film? In the comments for your Batman Arkham Knight trailer review, some of us were saying how The Last of Us would make for an amazing film adaptation, and now it seems to be happening. It does indeed. If you liked World War Z, I think you'll like this." I think it's interesting you brought that up, Raz, because I actually feel it's very different from World War Z. But continuing on. "This game has a better story, script, and character development than many of the films I've seen come out of Hollywood recently." That's not a hard thing to do, unfortunately, these days. "And features an incredibly strong and likable female character. Please cover this story. It has the potential to be a big deal." Really wide smiley face, when they use the D instead of the parenthesis mark. All right, so then Nate chimed in yesterday and said, "Oh, yes, Grace, you should definitely cover this. And I recommend you watch the first 15 minutes at least of the walkthrough for The Last of Us, the cinematics, so you can see how good the storytelling is." And Nate says he has made each member of his family sit down and play through the first 15 minutes as a showcase as how far gaming narrative has come in so many ways. Fascinating. Thank you for this recommendation, both Roz and Nate, and happy birthday, Roz. I have to say, I looked for the cinematic last night. I went online, and I have to say, I couldn't find just the first beginning of this game. I'll put a link in the video description as to where you can watch it if you're interested in. But I could only find the movie version, 2 hours. I saw the one that was 6 hours. I guess that was including gameplay of this whole movie. So I started to watch it, and I really have to say, instead of a World War Z vibe, I was getting the opposite of World War Z, and I'll explain that in a moment. But it seems very Walking Dead to me, and it's so much so that I can see why Sony, who is actually the distributor of the game, the video game, and is now going to be making the movie through their Screen Gems label, would want to make this into a film, because it's so much like The Walking Dead. It's a lot like The Walking Dead. I got serious Walking Dead vibes. And I thought that the reason I say it's the opposite of World War Z is World War Z, one of the things I liked about World War Z is it had a global point of view. It went to multiple cities. I thought that was great. I loved the globe-trotting. I liked the UN approach to the problem. Brad Pitt's character worked for the UN. I just kind of liked the journalistic aspects to the whole thing. It was almost like Time magazine made an action horror film. And that's what I really liked about it. Now, this is the flip side. I feel that The Last of Us is on a very small scale, which I think to some degree makes it more relatable. It really is, what would happen to you if the zombie apocalypse broke out and you weren't a sheriff like in The Walking Dead and you weren't a UN investigator like Brad Pitt in World War Z? You were just honestly a regular person. And I think that's what this game, from what I could see, I only watched about 20 minutes of it, does a very good job of capturing. Now, of course, I think that the cinematography, the camera choices are very good. The pacing was a little slow for me, I have to tell you. Maybe they do that so you can get up and walk around, or if you're checking, with your game controller, or you're planning your strategy, I'm not sure. But the pacing, again, it had a little bit of trouble, I have to be honest, keeping me engaged. But I could see the quality that you were talking about and the earnestness, and I felt that clearly the game makers were taking this very seriously. So I felt, I feel almost this would make a better, television show, but The Walking Dead already exists. So this, I would almost say, is kind of like The Walking Dead meets Hunger Games to some degree, with a male lead, which is interesting, an older male lead. And I wanted to speak to that as another thing that I wanted to address, because the creators of the game are going to be involved in making the film. Like, the writer of the game is writing the screenplay for the movie. But I wonder how it feels for the actors who did not only the voice work here, but the motion capture, that they're not going to be upgraded. Now, of course, Troy Baker looks nothing like the lead character here. I believe his name is Joel. But Troy Baker is a very famous, at this point, voiceover artist. He's so famous that even I know who he is. And he of course did the voice of the Joker. He took over for Mark Hamill in Arkham Origins, and then the upcoming Assault on Arkham video game. He did the voice of Two-Face in Arkham Knight. And then for the Avengers Assemble animated series, he's the voice of Hawkeye, Clint Barton, and he also did some work on Ultimate Spider-Man. So he works quite a bit, but that's the problem with, video game work, even though he physically and, vocally played this character, he doesn't look anything like it. So I don't really think that he could be used in the film, even though I really think it's to some degree unfair not to use him. However, I have to say, if I were Mark Wahlberg's agent, I would be all over this. I think he did a great job in Lone Survivor. I think he really has that regular guy feel, which is why I think Michael Bay tapped him for Transformers Age of Extinction. And if that doesn't hurt him, which I don't think it will, I think that he would be a great choice for this. He's actually would be my top choice, because Mark Wahlberg is a box office draw. This is someone, I also think it's an interesting dynamic, and I hope Hollywood doesn't age up this girl. There's a 14-year-old person that the male character is trying to protect. Apparently she's immune to whatever disease is affecting people. It's like a zombie kind of a game. So he's trying to get her to a certain destination. So I like the dynamic of that. And also there's a very tragic beginning about something that happens to this guy's daughter, which I thought was an interesting choice. And I thought, very, very realistic into some real world scenarios, about some of the horrors that happen in these situations, even sometimes from our own governments. So I liked that aspect, and because so you have him having his daughter, that history, and then protecting this new girl. So I think that it would be great if Hollywood and Sony, when they adapt this to a film, kept it just the way it was. And I think they probably will, considering how popular this game is. So let's just hope they can resist aging up that character to try and bring, I guess, the sexiness. Because she's 14. She's 14, Sony. Keep that in mind. She's 14. So I'm curious to how you guys feel. The Last of Us fans, do you have any faith that Hollywood would do a good job, Sony adapting this? Also, do you want to see this as a story that you don't control? Are you that enamored with the narrative? And also, as big and popular as this video game is, you're going to have to get non-video game people to see it for it to be a huge success. Although I have to say, from what I've seen so far, this would be a very inexpensive film to make, which I guess also appeals to Sony and Screen Gems, which it doesn't usually get big budgets for their movies. So I'm curious if this sounds like something people would want to watch. Go watch the cinematic, come back and say, hey, would I watch this as a movie or would I not? Is it too small? Is it too big? Is it too much like other properties like The Walking Dead or World War Z? Or do you like this kind of like really grounded aspect to it? So thank you, Raz. As I said, I'm not as enamored as I was with the trailer for Batman Arkham Knight, but then, I'm a big Batman fan. And I thought also, by the way, the character movements in that trailer were much more convincing. This still had a stiffness, and they didn't quite move the way like a human does. This didn't have the uncanny valley to me. When I watched the Batman Arkham Knight trailer, I felt, hey, you could tell somebody this was a live-action movie, and they might believe you at least a little bit. They wouldn't be sure. Here, this definitely clearly was, even though sometimes the faces looked very realistic, I'd say overall, clearly it was a video game animation. So thank you for your question, Raz. I hope that this was started an interesting discussion. Happy birthday again. Thank you for chiming in, Nate. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And you can write down below what you'd like to see covered on Monday, any questions you might have, and you can check out some more episodes right now.